Pretty often people who watch my videos on climate change will casually tell me in the comments that I'm a lunatic leftist. Generally these people are from the US, where climate change is more split across left and right political lines. Those people will continue to think what they want to think. This video isn't really aimed at them. But it occurred to me the other day, while I was gently mocking the latest of those who are utterly convinced that they're experts on the subject of what Mallen believes. But it was actually a really good question, which is, why have I never been of the left? Let me explain. As some of you know, I started my early campaigning years as a young man by opposing nuclear weapons in the United Kingdom. Now, there were lots of non-political people in the movement because at the time we were widely perceived to be on a hair trigger for nuclear Armageddon. And so lots of people were either scared, morally outraged of the idea that we might use such weapons against civilian populations ourselves, or a combination of the two. But of course there were lots of political people involved, the overwhelming majority of whom were on the left. Really, it was very similar as an issue in the UK then as climate change is now in the US. If you were protesting about nuclear weapons, lots of people took that as identifying you as being a lefty. Even though, really, like climate change, it isn't an issue that logically falls within the political definition of what makes left-wing or right-wing. If I was going to be led astray in my radical youth, you'd think that'd be where I would have gone. Not only did I not do that, I wasn't even remotely tempted to do that. I think there's a few reasons. First, when I got involved with the peace movement, I read a lot of Gandhi, and I was very influenced by the Gandhian approach. Gandhi was very much about finding common ground with your opponent, using non-violence as a vehicle to achieve a relationship of respect with those who you're seeking to influence or to win over. Which, you know, seemed to make a lot of sense in the context of a peace movement. Second, when I lived for a while outside the proposed nuclear cruise missile base at Molesworth, I associated with a couple of Quakers, Jennifer and Ian Hartley. Jennifer's approach was to reach out, writing hundreds of letters to local MPs, to ministers, to the base commander, to the Queen, all manner of pillars of the establishment to engage them on the issue. Some of those letters led to meetings. Jennifer would tirelessly push forward, making connections. And of course, whenever you take that sort of approach, you humanise all of those people. You often find support where you didn't expect to find it. And you come to understand some of the principled reasoning behind those who have a different opinion to yourself, which is all good, healthy stuff. Thirdly, at that time, I'd come to the conclusion that there was equal responsibility for the nuclear standoff on both sides of the Cold War. A view which I've sharply revised since then, having learned a lot more about the dynamics of the authoritarian Soviet regime, but it's what I felt then. But if you were on the left, you exclusively blamed the West. I remember going on an organised trip of students from different places to visit what was then East Germany. Half of us were going because we were curious. It turned out the other half of the group were committed young communists. We had endless arguments where they tried to persuade me that the wonderful thing about East Germany was that the state, rather than oppressing people like it did in the horrible West, in East Germany the state was the people, and they were all deliriously happy all of the time. Well, I was naive about lots of things in those days, but I certainly wasn't buying that. I only wish I could have been a fly on the wall when those people saw the Berlin Wall coming down a few years later, and all of those East Germans celebrating. I think the other thing that cured me of any inclination towards leftism was coming face to face with some of the hard left activists and the MPs and some of the top trade union bosses. I particularly remember in the mid-80s where I was speaking to a rally in Hyde Park, actually to a huge audience, although it was after a long line of union bosses had spoken, so everyone was mostly asleep by the time it got to my turn. Coming that close to the people in charge of the most militant trade unions at the time, as well as the people around them, it was an education. These were the people trying to bring down the government by undemocratic means. They were the out-and-out Marxists using their unions as a power base. Now, don't get me wrong, there are lots of people in the UK Labour Party who are moderates and go into left-wing politics because they think that's what you do when you care about the poor and the working class. Wherever you look, you will find good, decent people trying to make a difference. But I saw enough of the other kind to be extremely wary. And since those days, I've seen enough of the unintended consequences of well-intentioned policies to know that you have to have a look at what works, which is the blind spot of all ideologies. Personally, I think we do best when the moderate right is balanced by the opposition of the moderate left, or vice versa. The centre-right does well in creating systems that work. That appeals to the pragmatist in me. The centre-left does well in highlighting the people who fall between the cracks of those systems who need to be protected. And that appeals to the compassionate part of me. And I know for the young people who feel that the world needs to change urgently, neither of those seem adequate for the task. But it's the lessons about what works and what doesn't in practice that really makes the difference in actually changing the world for the better.